Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today, we're tackling, well, it's a fascinating topic, really. Black masculinity in hip-hop music.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're looking at it through the lens of, black gay men who rap.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we're using this, academic book as our main source. It goes deep into their history, how these artists have navigated this whole, complex world.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating intersection, right? Race, gender, sexuality, all coming together in music. It's really about how societal expectations and tensions play out, sometimes in challenging ways, but, always creative.
Definitely. And it's not just about the music itself, right? It's about representation, identity, the fight for equality. And you know what's really interesting? The book even explores how things like HIV/AIDS, and even get this, the expectations of women, have shaped, how we think about Black masculinity.
Right.
So to kind of set the stage, let's start with some historical context.
Yeah.
The book goes way back, tracing the roots of Black masculinity in America to the legacy of slavery and the fight for civil rights. That was really eye-opening for me.
Oh, absolutely. It argues that, for Black men, the quest for equality often became intertwined with this need to prove manhood. Achieving equality was almost synonymous with achieving manhood rights. So it led to this hyper-masculine ideal, and that's something that's been carried through to hip-hop culture, for sure.
It's like in trying to dismantle one oppressive system, another one got, reinforced,
Right.
Even if unintentionally. It's complicated. And then it connects to those early days of hip-hop. The book talks about groups like Public Enemy, rappers like Ice Cube, they're often called nationalist rappers, promoted a very specific vision of Black masculinity.
Yeah, and nationalist rappers in this context, I should probably clarify, refers to those artists who really centered their music around Black empowerment and often called for things like Black liberation, self-determination, a powerful message. But as the book points out, often this vision of Black masculinity they were promoting excluded Black gay men.
Right. It's a complex legacy, that's for sure. The book even mentions scholars like W.E.B. Du Bois and activists like Huey Newton. They contributed to shaping this perspective.
Especially Du Bois and his writings on, the talented tenth.
Yep, the talented tenth.
As he envisioned it, it was, this idea that a select group of, educated Black men would lead the charge for racial uplift. It was a very, you could say, patriarchal approach to civil rights, putting a strong emphasis on the tough Black man as a symbol of liberation. But, as the book argues, that focus on a narrow definition of manhood left many behind.
It makes you wonder what hip-hop could have been, what it would have sounded like if those other voices had been included earlier on. But, let's fast forward a bit. The rise of gangster rap, what happened there? How did that shift in the genre impact this whole narrative of Black masculinity?
Well, we go from what we call, the golden age of hip-hop,
Yeah.
with its focus on, more socially conscious lyrics, intricate wordplay, to this dominance of gangster rap in the late 80s, early 90s. And you see a real solidification of this hyper-masculine image. The book highlights MTV and the commercialization of hip-hop as key factors here.
Yeah, MTV and its focus on visuals, right? It put such a huge emphasis on how Black masculinity was portrayed, and often this played into existing stereotypes, especially for white audiences. We're just getting exposed to hip-hop, I think.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it created this cycle. Certain images sold, so they were produced more, which further reinforced the stereotypes. Artists like, NWA, Dr. Dre, they capitalized on this trend, although the book does mention some internal criticism. Even Ice Cube was expressing concerns about where things were heading.
It's interesting how the book points out the success of gangster rap really pushed alternative expressions of Black masculinity further to the margins. The voices of Black gay men especially were almost totally excluded from the mainstream.
Yeah, and this is where the book introduces this whole down-low phenomenon, which speaks to the anxieties surrounding Black masculinity and homosexuality, particularly at that time.
Yeah, it's a pretty complex topic. So can you explain a bit more about what the down low phenomenon was, why it became such a point of discussion?
Sure. So the down low, or DL, refers to, men who identify as heterosexual but engage in, secret sexual relationships with other men. This concept gained traction in the 90s, especially within the Black community. And the book argues that it was fueled in part by this fear of being perceived as gay, especially during the HIV/AIDS crisis.
So essentially men were hiding their true selves out of fear. But that secrecy had pretty serious consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
The book even talks about the controversial work of J.L. King and the debates surrounding his portrayal of DL men and how, like, women especially, felt betrayed by this phenomenon.
Yeah, J.L. King's book On the Down Low, A Journey into the Lives of Straight Black Men Who Sleep with Men, it caused a lot of controversy. Some felt he was, exploiting stereotypes and contributing to the stigma around black men and sexuality.
It really shows how, like, masculinity, sexuality, and fear are all intertwined, right?
Right.
And it's particularly poignant when you consider the lyrics from Cowes' song Creep, which the book analyzes. And his words give you this, this raw glimpse into the secrecy, the internal struggles of living this kind of double life. You really get a sense of the pressure and the fear of being exposed.
It's a powerful reminder of how societal expectations can impact individuals on such a personal level.
Totally. So from this landscape, right, where black gay men were often silenced or forced into hiding, we see this emergence of artists who chose to challenge the status quo. Let's talk about those black gay rappers who are, trying to carve out their own space within hip-hop.
They really did, and they showed incredible courage, especially given the level of homophobia that was so prevalent in the genre at the time. The book highlights figures like Tim T. West, Jube Kalamka, Lasto. They faced so many challenges, trying to break into a world that was often hostile to their very existence. They were pioneers, pushing boundaries, demanding to be heard.
And they were using their music to, challenge stereotypes, express their lived experiences, reclaiming their masculinity on their own terms.
Absolutely. One of the artists the book goes into in detail is Tim T. West. He really embodies the spirit of defiance.
Yeah, his work is so powerful. What are some examples of how he challenged those norms through his music?
Borgi Bohu Post Pomo Afro Homo, that song. The title itself is a statement. It's this deliberate mashup of labels that challenges the boxes society tries to put people in. It's like he's saying, I'm all of these things and I refuse to be defined by any one of them.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And his lyrics are just as bold and unapologetic. I remember the line from On Some Other where he says, a kiss is a moment like no other. So simple, yet it speaks volumes about the joy and beauty of love, regardless of, societal expectations.
Exactly. And it's not just West. The book also talks about artists like Point Five Fag, JB Rap. They were pushing for honesty, self-acceptance, advocating for a more inclusive vision of black masculinity through their music. They saw their art as like a form of activism, a way to break down barriers and create space for dialogue.
It's like they were saying, we're here, we exist, and we're not going to be silenced anymore.
Yeah.
Incredibly inspiring. And they drew inspiration from, figures like James Baldwin, Audre Lorde, who challenged societal norms themselves.
Absolutely. They looked to figures like Baldwin and Lorde and, reinterpreted black history and identity to include the experiences of black gay men. They were creating a sense of heritage and belonging, something that had been denied to them for so long.
It's a powerful reminder that history isn't fixed. It's constantly being rewritten, reinterpreted to include voices and experiences that were previously marginalized or erased.
Yeah, for sure. And they weren't just challenging, straight society. They were also confronting limitations of mainstream gay culture, which is often perceived as being, white and middle class. They were creating something new that spoke directly to their unique experiences as black gay men.
Forging their own path, paving the way for others.
And in doing so, pushing the boundaries of what it means to be a man. The book introduces this concept of homosexual masculinity, which challenges the traditional binary, right? Forces us to reconsider these categories we use to understand gender and sexuality.
It's like a reclaiming of power and agency, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. They were saying we're here, we're queer, and we're part of this history too. And that challenges everyone, not just straight people, but the gay community as well, to expand their understanding of what black masculinity can be.
It's such a powerful message of, like, inclusivity. The need to break free from rigid categories. Now, one thing I found really interesting was how the book explored this idea of spectacle and the burden of representation within, this whole context of black masculinity in hip-hop.
Right. Historically, black people have often used spectacle, things like marches, protests, even certain forms of cultural expression, as a way to fight for civil rights and equality. But as the book points out, this often prioritized black manhood as the central focus, further marginalizing black LGBTQ plus individuals.
It's like this idea of the burden of representation, right? This pressure to present a unified front, to speak for an entire race.
Hmm.
But that can lead to the suppression of diverse voices within that community.
Exactly. And the book argues that that pressure is amplified within hip-hop culture, both from within the community itself and from those external forces. It's like this expectation to conform to a very specific image of blackness, and anyone who doesn't fit the mold is, well, ostracized, ignored.
And when you add the element of commercialization, like we talked about earlier, the stakes get even higher.
Absolutely. The book talks about how the media often co-opts spectacle, turning it into a commodity that reinforces stereotypes rather than challenging them.
This tragic irony where the very forces that were meant to liberate become, tools of oppression.
Precisely.
And the book highlights this tension by comparing, artists like Public Enemy, who were very much a product of the civil rights movement, with their politically charged lyrics, with groups like NWA, who emerged later and represented, I guess you could say, a more raw street-level perspective.
Yeah, so Public Enemy's music was about raising consciousness, fighting injustice. NWA, on the other hand, their focus was more on surviving within the system, reflecting those realities of their lived experiences.
Right, but as NWA's music gained popularity, so did those, their hypermasculine and often homophobic images.
Yeah.
It became this dominant image of black masculinity for a large segment of society.
And the book argues that this was driven, at least in part, by the fact that, well, the majority of hip-hop consumers at that time were white. It's like this, self-fulfilling prophecy. They want to see a certain image of blackness, so that's what gets produced and marketed to them.
Makes you wonder how much agency artists really have in shaping their own narratives.
Yeah.
When commercial success is on the line. Tough question.
It really is. Is it possible to challenge the system from within? Or does playing the game inevitably mean reinforcing its rules?
Big questions. And these are questions that these black gay rappers were grappling with. Their very existence was a challenge to the dominant narrative. Let's talk about HIV/AIDS and its impact on all of this, because it plays a significant role in the book's analysis.
The AIDS crisis, particularly in the 80s and 90s, really amplified those anxieties surrounding black masculinity and homosexuality. The fear of being perceived as gay, especially, in the context of this deadly disease, it pushed so many men further into the closet.
The book highlights the cases of Max Robinson, a prominent news anchor, and Magic Johnson, the basketball star. Mm-hmm. Both contracted HIV, and the public reaction was incredibly revealing.
Yeah, there was this desperate attempt to distance these men from homosexuality, even though their diagnoses were, likely linked to sexual activity with men.
It was like this unspoken rule.
Yeah.
To be a successful black man, you had to be straight. Anything else was just unacceptable.
And that fear tragically contributed to the whole DL phenomenon we were talking about. Men were afraid to be their true selves, so they lived these double lives, putting themselves and their partners at risk.
It's just a reminder of how harmful these rigid notions of masculinity can be, not just for individuals, but for entire communities. Now, the book also goes into some fascinating psychological perspectives on this whole masculinity crisis. It talks about how traditional masculinity, with its emphasis on dominance and emotional suppression, can actually be a form of self-harm.
Yeah, like men are trapped in this cage of their own making,
Yeah.
Unable to express their true emotions, connect with others on a deeper level.
And the book argues that this can manifest in those destructive behaviors we see, like violence, homophobia.
It's almost like these men are lashing out at anything that threatens their sense of self, their carefully constructed image of manhood.
The book even mentions this concept of aim inhibition, where men learn to settle for, partial or modified fulfillment of their desires because they're afraid to embrace their true selves.
Tragic, really. A waste of human potential.
And it's not just men who suffer. The book talks about how women, especially black women, are often tasked with this burden of providing emotional support for men while being denied that same level of emotional expression themselves.
It's a double bind. Women are expected to be nurturing, understanding, but also submissive, emotionally contained.
And when men refuse to acknowledge or address their own emotional needs, it puts such a strain on relationships.
Creates a dynamic where women are constantly giving, men are constantly taking. And this is where the whole DL phenomenon becomes even more insidious. It's not just about men hiding their sexuality, right? It's about perpetuating the cycle of emotional dishonesty that harms everyone involved.
It's a form of, emotional manipulation, whether it's intentional or not.
Yeah, right.
The book uses this term, heterosexual superego, to describe the internalized set of rules that dictates how men are supposed to behave.
The heterosexual superego, as the book explains it, is like this internal voice telling men that they need to be, strong, dominant, and unemotional to be considered real men. And it's a set of beliefs that are often passed down, generation to generation, and it can be incredibly difficult to break free from.
So it's not just about the external pressures, right? It's also about these internal struggles men face trying to conform to these often unrealistic and harmful expectations.
Exactly. And the book really emphasizes that breaking free from this heterosexual superego, dismantling these harmful expectations is key to creating a more just and equitable society for, well, for everyone.
It's about recognizing that true strength comes from vulnerability, from being able to connect with others authentically, and embracing a more, I guess you could say, a more expansive, inclusive vision of what it means to be a man.
It's a profound shift in perspective and one that's, well, slowly but surely gaining momentum.
And the book points to these black gay rappers as examples of men who are pushing back against those expectations. They're not afraid to be vulnerable, to express their emotions, to love who they love.
They're creating a new blueprint for what it means to be a man, one that embraces, empathy, compassion, and love. It's powerful.
It's revolutionary. So what does this all mean for our listeners? What are the key takeaways here from this dive into black masculinity and hip hop?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's about recognizing that masculinity isn't a monolith. There's no one right way to be a man. And black masculinity in particular, it's incredibly diverse and constantly evolving. These black gay rappers are living proof of that.
They're challenging us to expand our understanding of gender and sexuality and create a world where, where everyone can be their authentic selves without fear of judgment, discrimination.
And for anyone who might still be struggling with their own identity, coming to terms with their sexuality, these artists offer a message of hope, of resilience.
You're not alone. There's a community out there that embraces you for who you are. That's the beauty of music, right?
It connects us, creates a sense of belonging, and inspires us to be better versions of ourselves.
Oh, definitely. One of the most profound takeaways from this deep dive is this recognition that personal transformation is deeply intertwined with social change. You can't dismantle these systems of oppression without first addressing the ways in which we internalize them.
Right. It starts with each of us questioning the narratives we've been taught, challenging the status quo, and embracing a more expansive and inclusive vision of what it means to be human.
It's a journey we're all on.
A journey of self-discovery and collective liberation.
Well said. So if hypermasculinity is a product of societal forces, as this book so clearly argues, then the question becomes, how can we redefine black masculinity and masculinity in general to be more inclusive, more accepting of diverse expressions? How can we create a world where vulnerability is seen as strength, where emotional honesty is valued, and where love in all its forms is celebrated?
Those are the questions we need to be asking.
Absolutely. We encourage you to keep exploring this complex, evolving topic. We'll leave you with that food for thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, it really is a call to action, isn't it? Not just to understand these complex issues, but to actually work towards dismantling the systems that perpetuate them.
Totally. And it's fascinating how the book digs into the specifics, how hypermasculinity was constructed and then reinforced, especially in the context of gangster rap. There's this whole section that breaks down like lyrical themes, visual tropes, even marketing strategies that contributed to this image.
It's like a blueprint for how to create and sell a hypermasculine persona. The lyrics often glorifying violence, objectifying women, demonizing anything associated with femininity or homosexuality.
And then the music videos took it even further, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The imagery was so powerful. Guns, fast cars, scantily clad women, aggressive posturing. It was all about projecting this image of power and dominance, often at the expense of others.
And it resonated with audiences, both black and white. But I think for different reasons. For some black audiences, it was a reflection of their realities, the harsh realities they were facing in their daily lives. It was a way to reclaim power in a world that often felt oppressive.
Right, but for white audiences, it often played into existing stereotypes and fears. It reinforced this image of black men as inherently dangerous, threatening. It's almost as if the music became a self-fulfilling prophecy, contributing to the very problems it was trying to address.
Complicated, for sure. Now, there's another concept the book introduces that I found really interesting. This idea of the heterosexual superego. Sounds kind of academic, but it's actually pretty relevant to understanding the pressures that men face.
It is a bit jargony,
Yeah.
but it basically refers to this internalized set of rules that dictates how men are supposed to behave. It's like this voice in their heads telling them that to be a real man, they have to be strong, stoic, dominant, heterosexual.
And any deviation from those rules is seen as a weakness, a threat to their masculinity.
Exactly. And that can manifest in all sorts of ways, from suppressing emotions to engaging in risky behaviors to lashing out at anyone who challenges their carefully constructed image of manhood.
So how does this whole heterosexual superego play out in the world of hip hop?
Well, the book uses some really interesting examples from, hip hop lyrics, artist behavior to illustrate this concept. Think about how often you hear rappers boasting about their sexual conquests, their wealth, their ability to dominate others.
Or how they use homophobic slurs, denigrate women in their lyrics.
It's all part of this performance of masculinity, this need to constantly prove their manhood to the world. And sadly, it often comes at the expense of their own emotional well-being, their ability to form genuine connections with others.
It's like they're trapped in this cycle of trying to live up to these impossible standards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And breaking free from this heterosexual superego is presented as a crucial step towards creating a more just and equitable society.
Recognizing that true strength comes from vulnerability, right? From being able to express your emotions authentically and embracing a more expansive, inclusive vision of what it means to be a man.
And that brings us back to the artists we were discussing earlier, those Black gay rappers who are challenging those very norms through their music and their lives.
They're showing the world that you can be strong and sensitive, masculine and vulnerable, all at the same time. They're redefining what it means to be a man on their own terms.
And that's a powerful message, especially for younger generations who are still trying to figure out who they are and how they fit into the world.
Giving them permission to be their authentic selves, embrace their individuality, challenge the status quo. But it's not just about individual empowerment, right? The book also emphasizes the need for collective action, for dismantling the systems that perpetuate these harmful ideologies.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together. We need to work together to create a world where everyone feels safe and valued, regardless of their gender identity or sexual orientation.
Now, I found it really interesting how the book explored the impact of the HIV/AIDS crisis on this whole conversation around Black masculinity.
Right. The AIDS epidemic in the 80s and 90s really amplified the anxiety surrounding Black masculinity and homosexuality. There was this overwhelming fear, not just of the disease itself, but also of being perceived as gay, which was often seen as a death sentence at the time.
It was a period of intense stigma and discrimination. And the book highlights how this fear pushed many men further into the closet. They were terrified of being ostracized by their families, their communities, society at large.
And that fear had a huge impact on the whole down low phenomenon we talked about, men living these double lives, engaging in secret sexual relationships with other men while maintaining this facade of heterosexuality.
This dangerous cycle of secrecy and denial, fueled by the fear of being judged and rejected. And it had devastating consequences both for the men involved and for their partners who are often unaware of their true sexual activities.
The book really argues that the AIDS crisis exposed the fragility of these traditional notions of masculinity and how these rigid expectations were actually harming men, preventing them from seeking the help and support they needed.
A wake-up call, in a sense, highlighting the need for more open and honest conversations about sexuality, the complexities of human experience.
And it's interesting to think about how this period of crisis intersected with the rise of gangster rap, which was often promoting this, hyper-masculine and homophobic image of Black men.
Yeah, it was almost like these two narratives were playing out in parallel. One reinforcing fear and secrecy, while the other was promoting aggression and dominance.
It was a complex and often contradictory landscape. And the book does a great job of unpacking these competing forces and highlighting the challenges faced by Black men trying to navigate their identities in such a turbulent environment.
It's a reminder that you can't talk about Black masculinity without acknowledging the historical and social contexts that have shaped it. It's not just about individual choices. It's about the systems of power and oppression that continue to influence how we see ourselves and how we relate to each other.
Absolutely. And it's about recognizing that these issues are all interconnected. We can't dismantle homophobia without also dismantling racism and sexism.
It's about creating a world where everyone feels safe and empowered to be their authentic selves, regardless of their race, gender, or sexual orientation.
Now, the book also delves into some interesting psychological perspectives on this whole masculinity crisis.
Yes, I remember that section. It was really insightful. He talked about how traditional masculinity, with its emphasis on dominance and emotional suppression, can actually be a form of self-harm.
Right. It's like men are trapped in this cage of their own making, unable to fully express their emotions or connect with others on a deeper level. And this can manifest in all sorts of destructive behaviors, from violence and aggression to substance abuse and depression.
It's like they're constantly trying to live up to this impossible ideal of what it means to be a man, and it's taking a toll on their mental and emotional well-being.
And it's not just men who suffer. The book also talks about how this rigid definition of masculinity harms women as well.
Right. It creates this dynamic where women are often expected to be the emotional caretakers, providing support and understanding while suppressing their own needs and feelings.
This cycle of emotional inequality, perpetuating harmful gender roles, preventing both men and women from experiencing true intimacy and connection.
And the book argues that breaking free from this cycle requires a fundamental shift in how we view masculinity, recognizing that vulnerability is not a weakness, but a strength, and that true emotional intimacy comes from being able to express your feelings authentically.
Moving beyond the limited definitions of manhood that society has imposed on us and embracing a more expansive, inclusive vision of what it means to be human.
And the book points to these Black gay rappers as examples of men who are living that truth, who are challenging those norms and showing the world that you can be masculine and sensitive, strong and vulnerable, all at the same time.
Role models for a new generation, showing that it's possible to break free from the constraints of the past and create a more just and equitable future for all.
And their music is a testament to the power of art, to inspire, to challenge, and to create positive change.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in dismantling these systems of oppression and creating a world where everyone feels safe and empowered to be their authentic selves.
It's inspiring, to see how these artists are using their platforms to push those boundaries, challenge conventions. It makes you wonder, what were some of the ways these Black gay rappers incorporated these ideas of redefining masculinity into their music? What did that look like?
Well, the book really breaks that down. It highlights how their lyrics often directly address those struggles of being both Black and gay in a society that often tells them, they can't be both. They talk about, their experiences with homophobia within the Black community, the pressure to conform to hypermasculine ideals, and the complexities of, navigating their identities in a world that tries to put them in these rigid boxes.
So they're not shying away from those tough conversations, right?
Right.
They're bringing those experiences to the forefront through their art.
Exactly. And they're doing it in a way that's both personal and political, right? They're sharing their own stories, but they're connecting those experiences to broader social issues.
It's like they're saying, hey, these are our lives and they matter. They're demanding visibility, recognition.
Exactly. And they're doing it with incredible creativity and skill. The book analyzes their lyrics, highlights their clever wordplay, their use of metaphor, and their ability to blend genres and styles to create something new and unique.
Right. So it's not just about the message, it's about the artistry itself.
Yeah.
They're like pushing the boundaries of hip-hop, expanding the genre to include these previously marginalized voices.
And they're doing it while staying true to those roots of hip-hop, with its emphasis on storytelling, social commentary, and that raw, honest expression.
It's a reminder that hip-hop has always been about, challenging the status quo, speaking truth to power, giving voice to those who are often silenced.
Absolutely. And these Black gay rappers are carrying on that legacy, pushing the genre forward, expanding its reach to include a wider range of experiences and perspectives.
Now, the book also talks about, the impact of these artists on the larger hip-hop community and society as a whole. What are some of the key takeaways there?
Well, it argues that these artists have played a crucial role in challenging homophobia, both within the Black community and in broader society. Their visibility and their willingness to speak so openly about their experiences have helped to break down stereotypes and create a more inclusive and accepting environment, I think.
They're changing hearts and minds through their music.
Exactly. And they're inspiring others to come out and live their truth. They're showing the world that it's possible to be Black, gay, and successful, to be proud of who you are, and to use your voice to make a difference.
They're role models, not just for other Black gay men, but for anyone who's ever felt marginalized, silenced.
And their impact, it extends far beyond the world of hip-hop, right? They're part of this larger movement for LGBTQ plus rights and social justice. They're using their platform to advocate for equality, challenge discrimination, create a more just and equitable world for everyone.
Their music is a powerful tool for social change.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that art can be a catalyst for transformation, both on a personal level and on a societal level.
It can inspire, challenge, help us see the world in new ways.
It can give voice to the voiceless, create spaces for dialogue, understanding.
And it can help us to imagine a better future, and then to actually work towards making that vision a reality.
That's the power of music.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Black masculinity and hip-hop, what are some final thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think the biggest takeaway is that masculinity isn't, this fixed concept. It's fluid, it's evolving, and it's constantly being redefined.
Mm.
And these Black gay rappers, they're at the forefront of that evolution. They're challenging those traditional notions of manhood and creating a more inclusive and expansive vision of, what it means to be a man.
Breaking down those barriers, pushing boundaries, creating a world where everyone can just be their authentic selves without that fear of judgment or discrimination.
A message worth amplifying.
Couldn't agree more. So, to our listeners, we encourage you to seek out the music of these artists, to really delve deeper into the complexities of this topic, and to keep challenging your own assumptions about gender, sexuality, identity. It's a journey, of exploration, of discovery, and it's one that we should all be on.
It's a journey towards a more just and equitable world for everyone.
Beautifully said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.